What is up? So hey, you're about to listen to an interview that I did about just kind of my experience, my journey going from pre-entrepreneurship to now being a full-time entrepreneur. It's a little bit longer than the typical video that we put out, but there's a lot of really good nuggets in there that I think you're going to get a lot out of. So I hope that you can stick through the full video. Again, I think you're going to get a lot out of it. Before we jump into that video though, do me a solid, hit that like button. It's gonna do a lot for us in terms of up-ranking us in YouTube's algorithms, help us get this message in front of more people, help more people. Also, make sure you subscribe to this video, this channel. We're constantly putting out new videos with the goal of helping you become a more well-rounded investor, a more well-rounded and educated real estate investor, and ultimately help get you one step closer to the ultimate goal of financial freedom.
All right, so Adam, where did entrepreneurship start for you?
Where did it start? It's a hard question. I don't think that, for me personally, I don't think that that's like a Back to the Future, like I slipped on the toilet and hit my head and boom, there was the flux capacitor type of a thing, you know.
Well, when did you realize it in yourself? What did you see yourself doing that kind of started your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a lot, honestly, that factors into that. So, I come from a very like blue collar, poor, out in the middle of nowhere, like poor white personville, right? So like my grandfather served in the Navy, got home, was working in coal mines in Western Pennsylvania where people were dying of fever, right? Because the working conditions were so horrible. That my grandfather worked until the day he died as a manual laborer, as a landscaper. I would go visit my grandmother and grandfather at the trailer park as a kid when I would go stay with grandmom and grandpop. My mom and dad actually were the first of their respective families to go to college. My dad put himself through school, wound up working a full-time job while being a full-time student, all that fun stuff. And, he and my mom had pretty good jobs. Like I grew up middle class, really good upbringing, great household, was able to go on a lot of cool vacations and stuff. Growing up out in the middle of nowhere, about an hour and a half outside of Philadelphia, I had a cow pasture across the street from my house. So my parents were some of the more successful people out of all my friends' parents. So initially, I thought that we had it like really good. I got in a lot of trouble during my youth into my adult life too a little bit. But so I actually transferred out of public school into private school. And when I went to private school, I met people whose family was just better off than ours, right? Like parents are lawyers or major surgeons or whatever and have all this extra stuff. And what I really started to realize was that there were different incomes that people's parents made, right? But there was also a different like work-life experience that they had. I had some friends whose dads were like tip-top surgeons making buco bucks, and it seemed like they never worked. And then here are my parents like in pretty good jobs. My dad was a CFO before he retired, so it's not like he was making 50 grand. They both worked their butts off. And while I think that, like, if you ask my parents today if they liked what they did for a living, they would tell you yes. But as a kid, seeing them do it every single day, I was left with the feeling of that while they may have enjoyed it, there's probably other things that they would have liked doing more, right? So as a kid, man, and especially as I got older, like it was just, I really struggled with what I wanted to do for a living. I was always really envious of people that just seemed like, oh, I want to be a whatever. They just knew somehow. And I was always kind of like, well, I want to make a lot of money. Like that's what I knew. And so I just wound up pursuing business because that's just what seemed like it made the most sense. You know, I was good with math, I was good with business. That stuff interested me. I actually started out pursuing accounting and finance. I did 2 internships during college, hated both of them, decided I didn't want to do that anymore. But, you know, I didn't really think about becoming an entrepreneur until I worked for an entrepreneurial company. Like the idea of being a business owner I don't know that it really crossed my mind when I was younger until I got around people who were actual business owners, right? And then when they were talking about what type of money they were able to make and what their life looked like and what their financial goals were, I realized that the things that I wanted and what my goals were really aligned with them. And so it was like, okay, if I want to end up at this particular point, it seems to me as though this path is a better path than the one I had been pursuing before.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I don't think there was like an immediate moment. It was like an accumulation and combination of a lot of different factors in my life over an extended period of time.
Yeah, it sounds like primarily an accumulation of influences you had.
Yeah.
Starting from seeing what you don't want to do, what you don't want to be, to, okay, we're in the step this right direction, and then finally getting to a place where you work with somebody that is an entrepreneur, kind of putting that trigger in your head, this is what I want.
Yeah.
And the reason I ask is, you know, you hear all those glamorous stories where Johnny started cutting grass for people when he was 14, and like, we had our own, you know, Girl Scout cookie, you know, whatever it is, and that's how we started. But I think it's also really important for people to understand it's about who you surround yourself with and the influences around you. So what kind of...
Yeah, dude, I did not have any of those like pre-entrepreneurial signals that I wasn't Mark Cuban selling trash bags to people door to door. I didn't have a lemonade stand. I had a freaking cow pasture across the street from my house. If I had a lemonade stand, there'd be 4 cars that drove by. Like it would, you know what I'm saying? I didn't mow lawns. Like people had acre lawns. Like I'd be at one house all day. I'd make almost, you know what I'm saying? So I agree though. I think there's a lot of different avenues or paths that somebody takes to get to that point. And I'm not that typical, like, I was an entrepreneur as soon as I came out of the womb type of a story. That just wasn't me.
Yeah. So that segues me into the next question. Like, so influences got you on your path of entrepreneurship, the people you were around. This is almost 2 questions. How important is it to you, the people around you, and what kind of influence do the people around you have to date with your entrepreneurship journey?
Everything. The people around you determine everything. So great example. So when I got into real estate, right, I wanted passive income. I wanted to build a rental portfolio because I understood that if I had enough rental units and those rental units were providing me a certain income, that with enough rental units, my rental income could exceed my expenses, and boom, I could be financially free. I no longer have to trade my time for money, right? My rental units will pay all my expenses. I can do whatever I want to at that point. Start a different business, go work for somebody else doing something I'm really passionate about, go on vacation, become my daughter's homeschool teacher, right? I can do literally anything I want. Well, I got around some people, so I built a portfolio of 18 doors, single family, duplex, triplex, like small apartment stuff. And as I'm building that portfolio, like I know you have owned single family rentals, right? Like people get into the single family rental game like, I'm gonna become financially free. It's possible, but you need a buttload of houses in order to become financially free, especially if you have debt on most of those houses, which most people do, right? So I'm there like, I'm going into this thinking like 20 doors, 30 doors, I'm financially free. Dude, I had 18. I was making like minuscule amounts of money, and I was spending a pretty significant amount of time on it. So I'm talking about this with the people that I surround myself with, and I just so happened to have met some people who owned large multifamily apartment complexes, multi-million dollars. We're talking 50, 100, 200 doors per property, and they're talking about the deals that they're doing, and I'm realizing like, holy shit, all of these struggles that I have, if I just played in a bigger type of a property, a bigger asset, 4 out of 5 of those issues I'm facing right now would be alleviated, and in theory, I could reach my goals faster by buying 100 doors on one property rather than buying 100 houses on 100 different pieces of property. Right? So it was getting around that network that expanded my mind, right? So, okay, I don't know if you're a runner at all, but for the longest time, a 4-minute mile was thought to be literally impossible. It was thought that your body couldn't do that, right? Decades, this had been the case. Nobody ever beat the 4-minute mile. It was this insurmountable thing. Nobody even tried to do it. Then somebody does the 4-minute mile, and I think it was like 4 people in the next year, boom, did the 4-minute mile. What happened? The only thing that changed was their perception of what was possible or not, and the only reason that perception changed was because somebody that they knew did it. So getting around people can be so big. It can also totally cripple you. If you're around shitheads, they're going to drag you down the same way that if you're around great people, they're going to elevate you. They're going to pull you up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I actually went to a seminar one time and heard a guy talk. It was an entrepreneurship seminar, and he was basically saying, you know, I bet you think you're doing pretty good right now. Because think about who you're comparing yourself to. If you think you're the best person in your circle, I want you to start comparing yourself to me. This guy owned millions of businesses. Well, not millions, but a freaking ton of it seemed like. But it's like, who are we really comparing ourselves to determines also where we go. So I really like what you said there.
One of my mentors calls that exact same thing being king of the dipshits. He's like, great, you're the entrepreneur making 60 grand a year and you're balling because your friends are all making 40K a year. Like, you're not doing anything big. You just are around people that are doing worse than you. It doesn't make your accomplishments more impressive.
Exactly. So what do you think, Adam, are the most important character traits for an entrepreneur? And let me kind of add some preface to the question here. So you were not out of the womb an entrepreneur, but it sounds like you developed the traits, the drive, and all the other components to be a successful entrepreneur. What did that look like for you, and what do you think that needs to look like for somebody else in the same scenario?
So I think there's a couple things that are paramount to being successful as an entrepreneur, no matter what space you're in. Number one, you have to provide value to the marketplace. You have to. You can't, like, business owners are made to be the villains right now in our society, right? The big, bad, greedy business owner, blah, blah, blah. The reality is that if somebody's greedy in business, they won't make it. Generally speaking, right? There's always exceptions to every rule, but if someone's sole purpose in business is just to pad their own pocket and they don't care about creating value for their staff, their customers, they are going to go out of business in a relatively short period of time. Why would you continue to patronize someone's business if they don't provide any value to you, right? So you have to first and foremost have a want to help other people. You have to figure out a way to deliver value, and the only way that people can deliver value is if they're coming from a place of service, right? So that's number one. Number two, entrepreneurs have got to be comfortable with uncertainty and chaos. because things are always changing. And if you're an entrepreneur that started a business, there's gonna be so many whoopsies and mistakes and things that happen along the way. You're gonna pivot so many different times. You have got to be able to be calm in the face of adversity, not totally freak out when things don't go according to plan, and be able to pivot, right? And then directly in line with that is you have got to have grit. It is fucking hard to be an entrepreneur. There are days where I feel like I'm the best entrepreneur in the world. There are weeks where I feel like I am like this close to going out of business, right? Because we all are, you know, we all have evolving and revolving emotional states, right? But so there have been countless times over my career as an entrepreneur, which is like 15-ish years, maybe more than that now, where there were times that I felt like I just can't do this anymore. This was the last straw. Oh, we needed to make this happen. This fell apart, whatever. And at the end of the day, the only way that anyone in anything can ever fail is if they quit. The only way. Everything else is just simply a learning opportunity. So a lot of people might see me, right, 15 years, whatever, into being entrepreneur with 2 growing real estate businesses and think like, oh, that guy had it made, or this guy that, right? Some people would look at me and think that I've got it figured out. Other people would look at me 15 years in and be like, that's all that guy's done up until this point. But guess what? It doesn't matter. We all start at different points and we all have different end points, but what matters is where you wind up, right? The person that you become on that journey, not necessarily where you start. So there's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be things that don't go according to plan. There's always going to be that person that screws you over or whatever. The true entrepreneur says, fuck it, I'm going to be successful anyway, and they put their head down and they figure it out.
Yeah. So you mentioned failure and how in Grit, and I love that book, by the way, Grit. So what do you think, or let me ask you this, what were some moments of failure or obstacles you overcome as an entrepreneur that made you a better entrepreneur, or maybe put you on a path to a better area of success? What did that look like for you, very specifically?
How much time do we have for that?
Give me the 30,000.
I mean, honestly, man, like, I think it becomes very difficult as an entrepreneur who has owned a business and who has built a team. You know, if you've been in the game for 6 months, like, there have been failures that you have run into, that you have encountered, and that you have had to overcome. So, you know, there's a lot of things that I can think of. But dude, my first business venture was not real estate. Like, my very first business, I was doing direct sales for different clients, Verizon, AT&T, regional energy suppliers, office supply company. We were doing B2B and door-to-door sales, right? The least glamorous, least sexy thing in the world. We were in Chicago in winter, walking into businesses unannounced, okay, we were cold calling and we were doing impulse sales. Walk in, hey, what's up? You've never met me before, walk out with a contract, right? That's what we did. Totally commission-based. I built a team of like 35, 37 people, and I was very young still at that time. I was somewhat immature. I was rather egotistical. I think that every entrepreneur has a little bit of ego to them, but there's a healthy and an unhealthy ego in there too. So I was feeling really good because my team, out of like 20 vendors across the country representing this client, I had the biggest team and we were doing the most sales volume for the client. But in hindsight, my territory that I had in Chicago was not large enough to, on a long term, sustain that volume of sales reps. So we wound up burning through our territory. Had I been either A, less egotistical, or B, had better foresight, I would have realized that I needed to let go of the worst performing team members in order to salvage the long-term health of my territory, right? Instead, I was too busy focused on the immediate and not the long term. That was huge for me. And that business, I had a ton of ups and downs in that business, but that was the straw that ultimately broke the camel's back. We wound up going back into businesses like 6 weeks after we had literally just been there. We were getting thrown out of businesses, cursed out. My team, dropped from like 35 people to like 15 people, right? When you're working on commission in February in Chicago, being thrown out of places, it doesn't take that much, right, to go head for greener pastures. So I just didn't have it in me to rebuild that team. I had built that team so many different times. I just didn't have it in me to do it all over again. And so I shut that business down and transitioned, licked my wounds for a couple years before I got into real estate.
That's good. Well, my last question for you, in 30 seconds or less, what would you tell yourself 10 years ago?
Go bigger sooner. Think bigger.
I love that. Cool.
That was way less than 30 seconds.
That was way less than 30 seconds.
That was the only one that was a short answer to your question.
That's good. That's good. And then maybe let's just
End scene?
Yeah, exactly.